Today we are looking at expressing ratios in their simplest form. So to simplify a ratio, we need to make sure that all terms in the ratio don't have any common factors. So we need to divide all the terms in the ratio by ultimately the highest common factor, or HCF. But if you can't immediately identify the highest common factor, you can divide by any other common factor and then just keep dividing until your values have no more common factors. Now, it's also important to note that a ratio in its simplest form has only whole numbers. So if there are any fractions or decimals in your ratio, you actually need to multiply by either the lowest common denominator if you're working with fractions, or the appropriate power of 10. And I'll show you in an upcoming example how we determine what power of 10 we need to multiply by. So having a look at some examples now, we'll start out quite basic. If we're looking at simplifying the ratio of 25 to 40, we need to decide, okay, well, what's our highest common factor? And in fact, 25 and 40 only have one common factor, and that happens to be 5. So we divide both of those values by 5, so we get our ratio of 5 to 8. Then I've got another straightforward one. I've got 24 to 16. So look, I can see that my highest common factor of 24 and 16 is 8. So that's going to give me 3 to 2. But even if you couldn't see that 8 is the highest common factor of both of those numbers, you can see that they're both even. So you can start out dividing by 2, because as long as you've got both of your terms are even, they're always going to divide by 2. So you can continue dividing by 2 until you have no more even numbers. Because obviously the smaller your values get, the easier it is for you to be able to identify common factors. Then our next example actually has 3 terms. So we've got 18 to 30 to 15. So we need to look for the number that multiplies into 18, 30, and 15. All right. So with me looking at that, I can see that I'm going to be working with 3 as my highest common factor. Okay, so that I divide throughout by 3 and I get 6 to 10 to 5 as my simplest ratio. Then the next example I want to show you actually works with fractions. So we've got 3 over 5 to 1 over 3. Now we need to look at our fraction and determine what's called our lowest common denominator. So what that means is it's the lowest number that both of our denominators will multiply into. Quite often it's just going to be those two numbers multiplied together, but not always. So it is important that we do have a good knowledge of our times tables to make that job easier for us. So in this case, yes, our lowest common denominator is found by multiplying 5 and 3 together. So what we need to do is we need to multiply each term in the ratio by 15. So we're going to get 3 over 5 times 15 and 1 over 3 times 15. That's going to give me 15 over 5 to 15 over 3. Now, multiplying by the lowest common denominator ensures that we end up with whole numbers in our fraction. So our end result will be our ratio of 3 to 5. So in our last example, I just want to show you what happens when we're working with a ratio with decimals. So we've got a ratio of 0.7 to 0.05. What we want to look at and determine is what's the most number of decimal places either of those terms has. And in this case, it happens to be 2. So because one of the terms has 2 decimal places, that means we need to multiply both our terms by 100, or 10 to the power of 2. So 2 decimal places, 10 to the power of 2. That will ensure that that number becomes whole when we multiply. So multiplying throughout by 100 gives us 70 to 5, which we can then simplify using our highest common factor, which of course is going to be 5, which makes our ratio in simplest form 14 to 1. Now, for our last example, I just want to give you, I guess, a contextual example. So if we've got simplify the ratio of 2 hours to 1 day. So we know that to express a ratio, we have to be expressing our numbers in the same units. So it's most beneficial to change both of our units to the smallest unit that appears in our problem, which in this case is hours. So 2 hours to 1 day is going to become 2 hours to 24 hours, which we can then very easily simplify as 1 to 12.